Ladies and gentlemen, I said I would do it. A long time ago on Twitter, I said I would review the current new G.I. Joe series that is being released by IDW, because this is my part of reviewing issue by issue the new comics that come out as part of the former shambles out of the former IDW universe. That is, I'm reviewing the Transformer comics, but I'm also reviewing G.I. Joe. Now, G.I. Joe, I didn't really have much of a feel for G.I. Joe until I read the original IDW Universe G.I. Joe comics, in which case I fell in love with G.I. Joe. They were, generally speaking, very well written. They really attached me to these characters, gave me a better idea of what the universe and G.I. Joe is all about. It even opened me up to reading more of the 1980s G.I. Joe comics and watching the 80s G.I. Joe show. And I think the IDW G.I. Joe comics really was my entry to become a G.I. Joe fan. Now, G.I. Joe is relaunching in IDW with a brand new #1, and I guess sort of just like Transformers, and the question is, can this G.I. Joe new continuity stand on its own 2 feet as a new... My rice is done. But, so can this new G.I. Joe continuity stand on its own 2 feet? Can it be something that brings in G.I. Joe fans who will later on understand more about what G.I. Joe is about? Well, let's see. And ultimately, I just want to say, G.I. Joe #1 was terrible. In my opinion, it was terrible. The whole context, the whole pretext of this is that Cobra has taken over the United States. I know I don't have my camera on, but you can't see my wide gesture of shrugging. Like, how did Cobra take over the United States? And really, what is Cobra in this universe? Because Cobra isn't just a group of terrorists. Cobra takes on different forms and different continuity. So in order for us to care about Cobra taking over the United States, we need to know what Cobra is. Is it a state? Is it a terrorist group? Is it a powerful company? What is Cobra? Is it a mercenary group? We get no answers as to what Cobra is, and I understand half of my review can be dismissed by saying, oh, Radix, it's just issue 1. But this is the first issue that is the foundation for an entirely new G.I. Joe universe. This is an ongoing series, not a mini-series. And I'll be okay with these no questions being answered, Cobra takes over America, for a mini-series. I'd be okay with it for a major event that happens later on in a continuity. But you can't start off a G.I. Joe universe with Cobra taking over the United States when that opens up a whole lot of questions, on top of all the questions you need to answer in the beginning of a new G.I. Joe series so that the readers can compare it to what they know G.I. Joe to be. The intro talks about how Cobra has spread influence worldwide and that has resulted in war that has left few places untouched. How? What? How does spreading influence lead to the largest war humanity has ever seen? Because if you leave few places untouched, that means this is a world war. Has Cobra taken over most of the planet? Because they forced the United States into surrendering. That's a pretty big deal. What is going on here? There's no real explanation as to what Cobra is. There's no explanation as to how this war started. It just says Cobra spread influence. No, you can't just say that. That doesn't explain anything. And I get that they're trying to make us, come back for more, like, oh, I'm intrigued, I want to keep reading this. But it's having the exact opposite effect. It's having the effect of giving me the impression that they have no intention of answering these questions and expect you to just be satisfied with this. So if their intent is to spoon-feed us more about this critical information about the world we're in, and they intend to bring us in later with this huge question, it's having the opposite effect. Look at it this way. I read issue 1 about when it was released, and it's been out for a few months now, and I'm only now getting around to doing the review because I just don't care. I know issue 2's been released by this point, but I still haven't read it because I just don't care. Similar to the current Transformers comic, I probably wouldn't be reading it if it wasn't for the fact that I said on Twitter that I would review every issue when the series was announced. The world of Cobra occupied the United States is a very weird world where I don't know if we're trying to... I don't see how the Cobra rule is that bad. They do reference massacres and stuff, like Indianapolis Massacre, but besides that, we don't really see what sort of government Cobra has in place. There still seems to be stores, trains seem to be running on time, people are walking through the streets generally with a sense of safety, and I don't exactly understand why there's this resistance. They need to show, if you're going to do this Cobra has taken over the United States, at least open with some war crimes going on so we can understand why we wouldn't want to be ruled by Cobra. Although we do see that one building has a thing that just says gas mask ration packs, which is weird, and also not what the sign said. Oh, I guess I see a little bit of a shadow behind there. I'm looking at the comic as we speak. But gas mask ration packs, which is interesting. I guess that suggests there's some sort of gas warfare going on. But it really just doesn't feel like the world... Like, there is like this homeless dude who's checking his phone. How homeless is this guy? Or I guess he's sitting on a bench. He might not be homeless. I'm just looking at the dude with a beard thinking he's homeless. But the motto seems to be for Cobra, which is weird considering typically this phrase has been Cobra or something. Has Hail Cobra ever been used? I think Hail Cobra was used back in the 80s. I'm not sure. But it opens up with a familiar face with G.I. Joe Agent Duke running through the streets of Chicago with a new dude who we will be introduced to as Tiger following him on his moped, and some Cobra Vipers are chasing after him. And Tiger goes into the store, and the clerk says, "What's going on out there?" And Tiger says, "You don't want to know. Heck, I don't want to know." You're just seeing military officers chasing down one dude in the street, and you're describing it as if it's some sort of war crime. You don't want to know. Heck, I don't want to know. It sounds like you're trying to shield them from some terrible incident going on outside, but it's really just one dude being chased. Tiger runs contraband. You know, whatever. We don't really know what the point is for contraband. There's a general idea that America has lost the war. Throughout this whole... I was able to say throughout this whole scene, but also really throughout the entire comic, is very vague dialogue. And I know I've criticized the current Transformers comic for using vague dialogue, but G.I. Joe takes vague dialogue to a whole new level. Like, a lot of the lines of dialogue dropped in the scene in the store may as well not even be there. You could skip it entirely. You could just have him just discover the USB stick that Duke threw into the trash and just skip that whole scene. We see Major Blood, who's just a generic commander. Nothing really too interesting about him. They name drop events like the battle for Staten Island and the liberation of Rio Lindo, which Duke served as part of those stuff. But again, sort of similar to Transformers, just dropping things without any explanation. It's really not real world building per se. It does suggest that the conquest of the United States is a normal war, like through military conquest, so there were battles. So how is it that Cobra was able to defeat the United States while simultaneously waging a war with, from what we can assume from the introduction, the entire world? It really doesn't... I know I'm repeating myself. A lot doesn't make sense. I know it's issue 1, but there's only so far someone can suspend their disbelief on the first go without really any other introduction to this world. And then we have our first big issue with Blood killing Duke right in issue 1. Killing a very important G.I. Joe character. Now, again, I would say this issue would be fine if it was the first issue in a 6-issue Elseworlds type series where, oh, what if Cobra took over America? And that way we can kind of make our own assumptions about what Cobra is and what G.I. Joe is, and we would know who Duke is. But this is supposed to be the beginning of a new ongoing G.I. Joe universe here. And you killed Duke in issue 1. Does that not seem like a waste to you? Does that not seem like we'll shock audiences in the first issue? And then, ideally, if you're making a whole universe, you want to at least plan for there to be a continuation for the universe, because, let's say let's say you're writing, it's a whole new team of writers writing the book 5 years from now, and they have stories they want to tell about G.I. Joe but really can't because they've killed off Duke in issue 1. Now that's very optimistic of me to say because I do not think this G.I. Joe continuity will be in place at 5 years from now. I'd be amazed if it survives 2020. This is not a good start at all. We get a name drop for Dr. Mindbender, but you know, who cares? Tiger finds the USB Duke threw into the trash and looks at it. He has information on a Cobra monitoring station, which we really don't know what that is. Scarlet breaks into his apartment, and Scarlet really isn't much of a Scarlet. I don't really know what... Scarlet's just straight up a jerk. There's really no other way to describe her. But she steals back the USB and tells Tiger to stay out of the confrontation, and Tiger says that he wants to fight Cobra because his parents were in Indianapolis with the massacre and that his boyfriend disappeared into the occupation. So, you know, we're not gonna bother to build up this world or develop it. We'll just ask questions, but we gotta make sure we have our representation down pat. We wouldn't want to be deemed as a homophobic comic, I guess. Better to be called a non-coherent story than a homophobic comic, I guess. But Tiger expressed that he wants to continue the fight, and then Scarlet just kind of leaves. Scarlet, I don't understand what they're trying to go for Scarlet here, because like she acts out of character for Scarlet once she appears, and then she acts out of character out of the Scarlet we were introduced to literally the page before, when she just like doesn't do anything, with Tiger clearly saying that he's gonna be a problem for them later on. There's a scene with some, what I assume to be G.I. Joe operatives attacking the, I assume the Cobra monitor station. It just looks like a random Cobra facility. And then Tiger gets in and intervenes. But Roadblock and another dude, Frontier, who I don't care about, is in the fight. And they fight some Cobra operatives, and then when Roadblock kills a Cobra Viper, he just has this crazy, like, I just killed someone type moment. And I'm like, what? What do you mean you just killed someone? Like, what are you talking about? What did you think was gonna happen when you started fighting for a resistance group? Are you not trained in any combat whatsoever? And eventually we're revealed that G.I. Joe is not trained for combat whatsoever. G.I. Joe is what appears to be recruited by General Hawk, who is an actual U.S. military general who receives funding in orders from the United States. But the G.I. Joe itself is made out of civilian operatives who want to do resistance. Civilians who have no military background, no training. So this is the G.I. Joe unit that's going to be responsible for rescuing America. Right. Okay. A G.I. Joe unit who freaks out the moment they kill an enemy agent. Oh boy, this is a complete reverse from the original IDW universe, where G.I. Joe is specifically made out of the most elite of the elite military, until future writers try to retcon that. Like, they mentioned that one of the operatives was a substitute teacher until a few months ago, which, like, does that mean they joined G.I. Joe a few months ago? How long has this war been raging? How long has this war been raging is a good question to ask that isn't hinted at all. Also, I don't think you can have a living as a substitute teacher. Substitute teacher is kind of a part-time thing. As someone who works in the education industry, most substitute teachers I've noticed are typically people who already have a job but are trying to get into teaching, so are getting experience through substitute teaching, or someone who's retired and is just so content with their lives that they just want to stay active. Like, a lot of substitute teachers I know while teaching were like people who retired early and still wanted to do some stuff on the side. But you can't be a career substitute teacher. Nobody says, I'm a substitute teacher, when introducing themselves. But anyway, they beat the Cobra operatives, and they take Tiger into the G.I. Joe headquarters. They knock him out, then blindfold him. Stalker and Scarlet talk about recruiting Tiger. Stalker, who doesn't look like Stalker, besides the fact that he's black. Stalker is probably the only character I can kind of like in this series. He does point out that Tiger is like a type of person who loves revolution but has no military discipline. But Scarlet just tells him, you know, I'm ignoring your very valid points. And Stalker's just like, okay, I guess. So this tells me that Scarlet probably isn't a good military commander. Whatever. But she recruits Tiger, just kind of says that his name's Tiger, which, you know, there's no sort of meaning whatsoever to the name Tiger. I think he might have a picture of a tiger on the back of his jacket. I know it's there on the cover, but actually, now that I'm looking through it, okay, yeah, there's a tiger on the back of his jacket. Alright. Typically, names in G.I. Joe are a bit more meaningful, at least in the original IDW universe, when they give the time to explain a character's name. But yeah, they recruit Tiger into G.I. Joe despite Scarlet telling him to stay out of it. Despite everyone saying no, he gets put into G.I. Joe. General Hawk comes in and he says that the United States has surrendered. And you see Cobra marching through the streets. You also see people cheering, which, like, what is this war? What is happening? You know? But yeah, that's the cliffhanger they leave it off on. A bunch of characters we don't know and don't care about in a country that is fighting a world war against one organization fighting a world war by themselves and winning, and it's really unclear what the average common person's opinion of Cobra is. There's so many questions. So many questions. Issue 1 kind of had my mouth just dropping open at how much of a confusing mess it was. But that's G.I. Joe issue 1, and it does not look like a strong beginning to a new universe. If it was the beginning of an Elseworlds story, sure. A mini-series, sure. I could see this becoming very successful as a sort of Shattered Glass type side story that isn't in continuity or isn't the basis for what is supposed to be its own independent, strong IDW universe. But that's not what we're getting, is it? But yeah, I'll get to issue 2 whenever I get to that. But thank you so much for listening, or thank you so much for watching. My social medias are all in the description. Subscribe if you have not yet for more videos like this. And have a good day, ladies and gentlemen. Let's hope this G.I. Joe universe eventually gets better.